For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Christmas to everyone. The thing about history is quite often it's not so much about what's said, but who said it. It came home to roost for me yesterday because Christian and I were playing doubles, and in the heat of battle, cracks began to appear in our team. And my version of events is very different to Christian's version of events. But fortunately, there were innocent bystanders who were able to verify my version of events. But in Zim, we already know this, don't we? Because we have newspapers that report events from different angles. I had it made clear to me when I was at the petrol station, and I told the petrol station that I'd read something in the Herald. And he said to me, knowingly, but you know the Herald. And so we understand that we need to find out who's writing about something to be able to understand what actually happened. Of all the events in history, nothing is recorded quite like the birth of Jesus Christ. So Tacitus was a Roman historian, and in great detail he records what happened. That this baby was born, that it came from Nazareth. It was at the time of the census. But he's a Roman historian, and so he's coming at it from an angle. Josephus is a Jewish historian, and he gives all of the same events. He explains them in detail again. But he comes from a Jewish perspective. Now, Jesus didn't write anything about himself. Actually, it was only his disciples who wrote about him. And it's interesting that in their writing about Jesus, all of the events are recorded. I found that the first reading quite extraordinary, that you would record that amount of detail. If you were starting a religion, why would you add in all that detail? And what we see in the Bible is all the time there's geographical detail, there's historical detail, there's detail about people. And in this case, we're looking at the birth of a child. Now, the second reading came from an angle where it was looking forward to something happening. But it's talking as if it's happening now. Unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. And the government will be on his shoulders. And he'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And you're expecting this cosmic event to happen. But meanwhile, the writers of the gospel give us all the detail. And why we come to the conclusion that it's such good history and such accurate history is that these very disciples, in giving us the story, they don't come out looking that good, actually. In fact, the two main guys, Peter and Paul, look particularly bad. And as we look at them and as they're explaining themselves, we think to ourselves, they're very, very much like us. Kind of from Meg's story, they're dirty shepherds. Now, I find it amazing that if they had an agenda, if they were trying to promote a narrative, they wouldn't end up dying for the narrative that they had created. So I think one of the things that we can conclude this morning is what we see before us is unbelievably accurate history. These events happened. Often we come at Christmas time and we sort of see it as a celebration, a little bit like a myth or a legend, an old wives' tale. But these things happened. There was a baby that was born in a manger in Bethlehem. Now, what I find interesting with this story is that when we're looking from Isaiah, the second reading, and looking forward, we're anticipating something big. When we go into Revelation, and now we're having a look at all of history all in one kind of picture, all at once, we have another picture of this event being recorded. And it tells us a great sign that was in the heavens of a woman who was with child. And the sun and the moon were under her, and she had the stars on her head, basically representing all of mankind. And at the same time, there was another sign in the heavens where there was a dragon, representing the devil. And there's this cosmic battle that goes on between the dragon and between the child. And all of the angels of heaven are fighting against all the fallen angels and all of their followers, and there's an enormous battle. And at the end of it all, the child is plucked up and taken up to heaven. And so before Christ, we see this wonderful cosmic event, and after Christ, looking back at the event, it's a wonderful cosmic event. But when we go to the nitty-gritty, we actually hear of a census, where a poor carpenter and his wife have to go and register. A little bit like us in Marandera having to go to the Rowan Martin building and standing in the queue. And then I can't imagine that it must have been a good conversation between Joseph and Mary. Mary saying, you didn't book ahead. In our family, it's interesting. We've got a mum who's very detailed and a dad who's not as detailed, and we often have this same dynamic. You mean you didn't book a room for us? And now we're in this. And you can imagine him now. I'm about to have a baby. And we're going to stay here? It's very earthy, isn't it? It's very detailed. It's very ordinary. It's not what you're expecting when you read Isaiah 9, that there's going to be this cosmic event. Because it's interesting in the scriptures that everything in the scriptures is pointing to this one thing, that this baby will come into the world, and that he will rule the world. All of the Old Testament looking forward to this event. The Gospels telling the event. The book of Acts preaching the event. The epistles explaining the event. And then Revelation saying that this same Jesus will come again. Everything points to it, and yet when it happens, it's in a manger. The creator of all of the world, the one who says, I was there when I saw Satan flung from heaven, the one who has said, I saw it all being made, is born in a manger. Quite an extraordinary story. And so the question that we left with this morning is, well, who was he? Tacitus said he was an unusual boy, but he was nothing that special. Josephus said the same. But the people who wrote the Gospels said, no, he was God. He was Emmanuel. He was God with us. And when we look at it from the outside, this ordinary event of a census and them coming into the stable and the baby being born and then the shepherds coming in, all very ordinary. But as we get closer and closer, we find for ourselves that this is no ordinary boy. He's different to anybody who's ever been in history. Not only is he morally pure, not only does he not sin, but he does things that other people don't do. Most of all, he keeps on saying, I'm God. Now think about it this morning. If I came and said to you, I'm God, the way Davey would put it is he would say, he's not right in the head. And that's exactly right. You would know there was something wrong. But this guy, this Jesus said, I'm God. And he didn't say it once, he said it over and over again. And then he said, the Father and I are one. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. And then he does things that are just extraordinary. He goes to a tomb and he says to the man inside, Lazarus, come out. And the man comes out. And then he goes on a lake, and the wind comes up, and there's a storm, and he says, be still. And the storm is still. And then there are people who lame, and he says, get up and walk. And there are people who are sick, and he says, be well. And it's not like the modern day guys where you can never verify it. No, it happens immediately and completely. He does all of these things. And you might be thinking to yourself, but wasn't it maybe made up? But actually what the Gospels tell us is that there were many, many reliable witnesses. And that's the beauty of history, is when we write something like that, 2,000 years ago, it might seem like it had been far-fetched, but at that time there were the 500 guys. You see, I could say to you, the problem was that Christian fell apart under pressure. And there were 500 witnesses. But you could come and check up, and you could verify. Those events happened. That history was recorded. All of these things were true about Jesus, that he was no ordinary man. And then as extraordinary as it was, it comes to a crescendo when he comes to the cross. The one who has all power and all authority chooses to die on the cross for the very people who've put him there. And if we think deeply about it, that's you and me. Isn't it an interesting thing that this Jesus, nobody wants to talk about him. Nobody wants to consider him. You're not going to go onto CNN and you're going to find the nativity story. What you will see is you'll see presents and you'll see Christmas trees and you'll see Father Christmases and you'll see everything. But talking about the baby that was delivered to us by God, that came through labor, that had all of these normal things happening, you're not going to find that on CNN. And I can't help thinking to myself, is this the battle between the dragon and the woman? And is the real battle something that's happening inside my heart? Could it be that there's a battle that's going on for my soul? And the one who's going to govern is the creator of all of the world. And he came into this world with this great message to save me from my sin, to bring me eternal peace. Is this the battle in the heavenlies? Is this cosmic event that has taken place? As we are unwrapping the paper, is this the real gift? Do all the other gifts pale into insignificance compared to the fact that God came into our world in time and space and in history to deliver us from our sin? Yes, of course, he's going to come again. And he's going to reign and rule, and every knee will bow, and he'll judge the living and the dead. We know that. But the question for us this morning is, what is the gift? Is it possible that the creator of all of the world could have come for me? When I'm thinking about this, I just can't help thinking again about Zacchaeus. That little fat tax collector nobody liked. But he decided that he was going to go and see Jesus, so he climbed up in a tree. And Jesus came to the tree and he said, Zacchaeus, come down, because I want to dine with you tonight. And then I remember the woman, the Samaritan woman, hated by the Jews. And Jesus said to her, take me to your husband. And she said to him, I don't have a husband. And he said, that's right. You've had 5 husbands. And the man you're living with is not your husband. As I said, she's the woman who was looking for love in all the wrong places. And yet he came to her. And I wonder, for me, as I live in a house where probably none of you even know where I am, certainly most people don't, and I think, is this relevant to me? And the scriptures tell us plainly, the gift that is unraveled is the gift for you. That Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am amongst. That Jesus knows me. that he asks me to come and have dinner with him, that he says to me, I stand at the door and knock. Anyone who calls me in, I will come in and I will dine with you. That's the great message for today. And my hope for all of us is that in all the joy and in all the festivities, we would unwrap the greatest present of all. That God entered time and space, that he came and he lived amongst us, and that he died on a cross so that you and I could be reconciled to him. Amen.